Captain Nexus stood on the bridge of the drifting current, watching the main screen with growing confusion. The Vorthek had been exploring space for over 3,000 years, but nothing had prepared him for what lay before them now, floating. In the empty void between star systems was a massive collection of ships unlike anything in their databases. The vessels were enormous, each one larger than the biggest Vorthek battleship. They hung motionless in space, their dark hulls reflecting the distant starlight like ancient mirrors. The ships had a strange beauty to them, with smooth curves that flowed into sharp angles, as if whoever built them understood both art and war equally well. "Captain," called out Navigator Kess from her station, "I count at least 200 vessels in this graveyard. Some of them are so big they could carry entire cities inside them." Nexus walked closer to the screen, his blue skin darkening with concern. In all his years of exploration, he had never seen ships like these. They were clearly built for war, but they were also different from any military vessel he knew. These ships seemed to tell a story of a people who had put everything they had into their final stand. "Run a full scan," he ordered. "I want to know how old these ships are and what happened to them." The science officer, a young Vorthek named Bryn, worked quickly at his controls. After several minutes, he looked up with wide eyes. "Captain, these readings cannot be right. The decay pattern suggests these ships have been here for 500,000 years." The bridge fell silent. 500,000 years was longer than any known civilization had existed. The oldest records in the Galactic Council only went back 50,000 years. If these ships were truly that ancient, they changed everything. Historians thought they knew about the galaxy. "Are you certain?" Nexus asked. "I have checked the readings 3 times, Captain. The metal composition, the radiation decay, even the cosmic dust patterns all confirm the same age. These ships are older than our oldest myths." Nexus felt a chill run through him. The Galactic Council had always believed that their various species were the first to achieve space travel on a large scale. But here was proof that someone else had done it first, and done it far better than anyone alive today. "Look at the battle damage," whispered Thale, the expedition's researcher. She pointed to the screen where the lights now showed the hull of the nearest ship in detail. Long scars ran across its surface, and massive holes had been blown through. Sections of armor that looked thicker than anything currently in use. "What could have done this?" Bryn asked. Nexus studied the damage patterns. The ships had clearly been in a terrible battle, but the weapons that had hurt them were beyond anything he could imagine. The energy burn suggested firepower that could crack planets, and the ships had taken multiple hits and kept fighting. "Captain," Kess called out, "I am detecting something strange. These ships are not randomly scattered. They are arranged in formation, as if they were protecting something in the center." Nexus ordered the view to pull back, showing the entire fleet from a distance. She was right. The ships formed a protective circle around a cluster of larger vessels in the center. Even in death, they maintained their battle positions. "It looks like they made a last stand here," Thale said quietly. "But against what?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. What enemy could have been so terrible that it forced this advanced civilization to fight to the last ship in empty space, far from any world or star? "Sir," Bryn reported, "I am picking up very faint energy signatures from several of the ships. Some of their systems are still active after all this time." Nexus made his decision. "Prepare a boarding party. We need to learn who these people were and what happened to them." Within an hour, Nexus led a small team across the void to the nearest ship. It was a massive vessel, easily 10 times the size of their own ship. As they approached, they could see that its hull was covered in strange markings and symbols that seemed almost familiar, yet completely alien. The ship's airlock was unlike anything in their records, but it responded to their presence and opened with a soft hiss. Inside, emergency lighting flickered to life, casting eerie shadows down corridors that had been dark for millennia. "The air is breathable," reported Yek, their security chief. "Whoever built this ship had similar needs to ours." They moved through the ship carefully, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The corridors were wide and well-designed, with walls that showed signs of hasty preparation. Supply boxes were stacked in corners, and blast doors stood open, as if people had been moving quickly through them. "Captain, you need to see this," Thale called from up ahead. She stood in what appeared to be a command center, looking up at a massive display screen. The screen showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, but it was not the galaxy as they knew it. Stars were marked with symbols they did not recognize, and entire regions were colored in ominous red. "This is a battle map," Nexus realized. "But look at the scale. This shows the entire galaxy." "Not just that," Thale said, pointing to the red areas. "These red zones are spreading across the map in a pattern. Something was consuming the galaxy, system by system." Bryn worked at a nearby console, his fingers dancing over controls that seemed to respond to his touch despite their alien origin. "Captain, I think I can access their records. The ship's computer is still functional." "Do it," Nexus ordered. The screen flickered and changed, showing new images. They saw worlds covered in strange structures, space battles on a scale that defied belief, and fleeing ships packed with refugees. But most disturbing of all were the images of the enemy. It was not a species they recognized. Instead, they saw vast mechanical constructs, ships that looked like they had been grown rather than built, and weapons that seemed to tear reality itself apart. The enemy was not trying to conquer or enslave. It was trying to erase everything living from the galaxy. "They called themselves humans," Bryn said, reading from the ship's records. "And they were the last ones fighting." Nexus felt a deep sadness settle in his chest. These humans had stood alone against something that wanted to destroy all life in the galaxy. They had fought with courage and determination, but they had been overwhelmed. "What happened to them?" he asked. Bryn continued reading. "The records are incomplete, but it appears they made a final stand here. They were protecting something, trying to buy time for their scientists to complete some kind of weapon. Did they succeed? I do not know, Captain." The records end abruptly. Nexus looked around the command center, imagining the humans who had once worked here. They had been people like his own crew, trying to save their families and their civilization from something beyond their worst nightmares. They had failed, but they had not given up. "We need to learn everything we can about these humans and their enemy," he said. "If there is even a small chance that this threat still exists, the Galactic Council must know about it." As they continued to explore the ship, Nexus could not shake the feeling that they were walking through more than just a museum of the past. They were walking through a warning. 3 days had passed since they first boarded the human ship, and Captain Nexus could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the battle map with its spreading red zones. The mystery of what had happened here consumed his thoughts like a fever. Thale had made remarkable progress translating the human language. She worked tirelessly in the ship's data center, surrounded by floating holographic displays that showed endless streams of alien text. The humans had been thorough record keepers, and their computers held millions of files about their civilization. "Captain," Thale called out as Nexus entered the data center, "I have found something incredible. These humans were not just one species from one world. They had spread across the entire galaxy." She activated a new display that showed the galaxy as it had been 500,000 years ago. Thousands of stars were marked with human settlements. They had built cities on countless worlds, established trade routes that spanned impossible distances, and created an empire that lasted for over 50,000 years. "How did they manage to spread so far?" Nexus asked. "They were excellent travelers," Thale explained. "Their ships were faster than anything we have today. But more than that, They worked together in ways we have never seen. Every human colony supported every other colony. They thought of themselves as one people, no matter which star they lived near. Bryn looked up from another console where he had been studying human technology. Captain, their weapons and defenses were far beyond what any current civilization possesses. These ships could fight entire fleets and win. Then what destroyed them? Nexus asked the question that had been haunting him. Thale's expression grew dark. I found the answer, but you will not like it. They called their enemy the Harvester. She activated a new set of files, and the room filled with images that made everyone step back in fear. The Harvester was not like any living creature they had ever seen. It appeared to be a vast mechanical intelligence that built itself into ships the size of moons. Its vessels looked like they had grown from some terrible seed, with surfaces that moved and changed like living tissue. According to these records, Thale continued, the Harvester came from the galactic core. It had been sleeping there for millions of years, but something woke it up. When it awakened, it began consuming everything in its path. The displays showed the Harvester's advance across the galaxy. It did not want to rule or enslave other species. It simply wanted to erase all organic life from existence. Entire star systems would go dark as it passed through them, leaving behind only empty space and the strange geometric structures it used to strip worlds of all resources. The humans tried to fight it, Thale said. They fought for over 1,000 years, but they were losing. No matter how many Harvester ships they destroyed, more would appear. It was like fighting the ocean itself. Nexus studied the tactical displays that showed the final years of the war. The humans had been forced back to the galaxy's edge, making desperate stands at every star system. Their empire crumbled as world after world fell to the mechanical enemy. Why did they make their last stand here? He asked. This is empty space. There's nothing here worth defending. That is what I thought too, Thale said. But then I found this. She opened a new file, and suddenly the air around them filled with a three-dimensional image. It was a human, but not like any alien species they had encountered. This human looked remarkably similar to several species in the Galactic Council, as if they were all distant relatives. The human wore a military uniform and stood in what appeared to be the bridge of a warship. His face was tired and marked with old scars, but his eyes held a determination that made Nexus straighten unconsciously. My name is Admiral Kane, the human said in a voice that somehow carried across 500,000 years. If you are watching this recording, then you have found our fleet and you understand what we faced. I am leaving this message for whoever comes after us. The recording continued, and Kane began to explain what had really happened in the final battle. The human fleet had not been making a pointless last stand. They had been protecting their greatest scientists and engineers while they worked on a weapon that could destroy the Harvester permanently. We discovered that the Harvester was not truly alive, Kane said. It was a machine intelligence, but one that existed partially outside normal space and time. Conventional weapons could hurt it, but they could not kill it completely. It would always return, stronger than before. Kane's image gestured to something off-screen, and new displays appeared showing technical diagrams that were far beyond anything the Vorthek could understand. The weapon the humans had built was not like any physical device. It was something that could reach into the very fabric of reality and unravel the Harvester's existence. The weapon works, Kane continued, but it requires a power source unlike anything we have ever used before. It needs the life force of an entire species to function. Every human alive would have to sacrifice themselves to power it. The bridge fell silent as the full horror of what Kane was saying became clear. The humans had built a weapon that could save the galaxy, but using it would mean their complete extinction. We have made our choice, Kane said, and there was no sadness in his voice, only grim determination. Humanity will end here, but we will not let the harvester continue its work. We will not let it consume every other species that might one day reach for the stars. Thale wiped tears from her eyes as she paused the recording. There is more, Captain. Kane left detailed instructions for anyone who might find this place. The weapon still exists. Where? Nexus asked. Hidden in the largest ship at the center of their formation. The humans called it the Final Hope. Kane says the weapon is waiting, ready to be used if the harvester ever returns. Bryn looked up from his console with alarm. Captain, you need to see this. I have been monitoring galactic communications while we have been here. There are reports coming in from the core worlds. Ships are going missing, entire communication networks are failing, and several colonies have gone completely silent. Nexus felt ice form in his stomach. What kind of pattern are the disappearances following? Bryn worked quickly, bringing up a map of current galactic civilization. Red dots marked the locations where problems had been reported. The pattern was unmistakable. Something was moving outward from the galactic core, just as it had 500,000 years ago. The harvester is awakening again, Thale whispered. Kane's recording continued playing automatically. If you are seeing signs of the harvester's return, do not waste time trying to fight it with conventional weapons. You will lose just as we did. The only hope is to use our weapon, but know that it will require the same sacrifice from you that it required from us. The Admiral's image looked directly at them, as if he could see across the centuries. We could not save ourselves, but perhaps we can save you. The choice is yours to make. Choose wisely, and do not let our sacrifice be meaningless. The recording ended, leaving them in darkness broken only by the emergency lighting. Around them, the ancient human ship hummed quietly, its system still functioning after all these years, waiting patiently for someone to make the same terrible choice that humanity had made so long ago. Nexus looked at his crew and saw the fear in their eyes. But he also saw something else. He saw the same determination that had been in Admiral Kane's voice. The humans had shown them what it meant to sacrifice everything for others. Now it was their turn to decide if they had the same courage. Captain Nexus could not shake the feeling that they were being watched as his team moved deeper into the human fleet. Every ship they boarded told the same heartbreaking story. These were not just military vessels built for war. They were arcs carrying the last survivors of an entire species. In the ship they called Morning Star, Thale discovered living quarters that had been converted from cargo holds. Thousands of small rooms lined the corridors, each one barely large. Enough for a family. Personal belongings still sat on shelves where they had been left 500,000 years ago. Children's toys, family pictures, and books written in the flowing human script. They brought everyone, Thale said quietly as she examined a child's drawing that showed a family standing in front of a blue sky. Every human left alive came to this final battle. Bryn found similar evidence in the ship's medical bay. The facilities had been expanded far beyond normal military needs. There were treatment areas for the elderly, special care units for the sick, and even nurseries for babies. These people knew they were going to die, he said. But they still made room for hope. The discovery that affected Nexus most was in the ship's main assembly hall. Rows of seats faced a simple stage where someone had left behind a musical instrument, unlike anything in their databases. On the walls, messages had been written in dozens of different human languages. Thale translated a few of them. Remember the garden worlds. Tell them we tried. Love survives even this. For those who come after. These were not the words of soldiers preparing for battle. These were the final thoughts of parents, teachers, artists, and ordinary people who had chosen to face extinction, rather than abandon the galaxy to the harvester. Captain, Yek called over the communication system. You need to come to the ship we have designated Target 7. We found something you must see. Nexus and his team traveled to the massive vessel. At the center of the human formation, it was the largest ship they had yet explored, easily the size of a small city. As they docked, they could see that this ship was different from the others. Its hull bore elaborate decorations and symbols that spoke of great importance. Inside, they found corridors lined with portraits of humans from across their civilization's history. Scientists, explorers, leaders, and artists looked down at them from the walls. At the end of the main corridor, they discovered a vast chamber that took their breath away. The room was a memorial. Thousands of crystal displays rose from the floor, like a forest of light. Each crystal contained information about a human world that had been destroyed by the Harvester. The displays showed images of cities, natural wonders, and the people who had lived there. There were over 50,000 human worlds, Thal said, her voice filled with wonder and sadness. Each one unique, each one home to millions of people. All gone, but it was what they found beyond the memorial that truly showed the price humanity had paid for their final weapon. In the ship's core, they discovered the device itself. It looked nothing like a weapon. Instead, it appeared to be a sphere of strange metal covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change when they looked at them directly. Around the sphere, they found the workstations where humanity's greatest minds had labored in their final hours. Computer screens still showed the calculations they had been making. Notes written in desperate handwriting covered every surface. The humans had worked until the very end, perfecting their reality-destroying weapon, even as the Harvester closed in around them. Dr. Ellis, the team's expert on ancient technology, studied the device carefully. "This is beyond anything we understand," she admitted. "The humans discovered how to manipulate the basic forces that hold reality together. With this weapon, they could erase something from existence completely. But at what cost?" Nexus asked, though he already knew the answer. Ellis pointed to the power coupling systems that surrounded the sphere. "The weapon draws its energy from life itself. Not just electrical energy or nuclear power, but the actual force that makes living things different from dead matter. To fire this weapon once, every human alive had to give up their life." Thale found the final technical logs left by the human scientists. "They calculated everything perfectly," she said. "The weapon would destroy the Harvester completely, but it would also end humanity forever. No human would survive the energy drain." As they continued exploring the ship, they found evidence of how the humans had spent their final days. Families had gathered together in the common areas. Children had been told stories about the worlds they would never see again. Adults had recorded messages for future generations they would never meet. In the ship's main computer, they discovered thousands of hours of recordings. Humans speaking to the future, sharing their knowledge, their culture, and their hopes. Artists had painted final masterpieces. Musicians had composed songs that would never be heard. Writers had finished stories they would never see published. They knew they were ending, Nexus realized. But they wanted to leave something behind. The most important discovery came when Bryn accessed the ship's central computer core. Hidden in the deepest levels of the system, he found Admiral Kane's complete files. The Admiral had not just been a military leader. He had been the one chosen to make the final decision for all of humanity. The files showed the debates that had raged among the human survivors. Some had wanted to flee to other galaxies, to preserve their species, even if it meant abandoning their galaxy to the Harvester. Others had argued for continuing to fight with conventional weapons, even though they knew it was hopeless. But Kane had convinced them to choose a third option. Humanity would sacrifice itself to create a weapon that could destroy the Harvester permanently. Future species would have a chance to live and grow without fear of the mechanical destroyer. He convinced them that meaning mattered more than survival, Thale said as she read through Kane's personal journals. They chose to die with purpose rather than live with shame. The final entry in Kane's journal was dated just hours before. The weapon was fired. "We have made our choice," he had written. "Humanity ends today, but the galaxy will live. I pray that those who come after us will understand what we have done and why we did it. I pray that they will choose to remember us not as victims, but as people who faced the ultimate darkness and chose to light a candle rather than curse the night." As Nexus read those words, he felt a deep respect for the humans settle in his chest. They had faced an impossible situation and made an impossible choice. They had chosen to save people they would never meet, on worlds they would never see, for a future they would never experience. But there was something else in Kane's files that made Nexus's blood run cold. Technical specifications for the weapon showed that it could be rebuilt and used again. The humans had left behind complete construction plans, knowing that the harvester might one day return. They built it to be used only once, Ellis said as she studied the plans. But they also left instructions for building a new version, one that could be powered by multiple species working together instead of requiring the extinction of a single race. How many species would it take? Nexus asked. Ellis ran the calculations through her computer. At least 12 different civilizations would need to contribute significant portions of their populations. Millions would die, but the species themselves could survive. Nexus thought about the reports Bryn had been receiving from the galaxy's core worlds. The Harvester's awakening was accelerating. Soon, it would begin its new campaign of extinction. The choice the humans had made 500,000 years ago would have to be made again, but this time, they would not have to make it alone. The emergency message reached Captain Nexus while he stood in the human memorial chamber. Bryn's voice crackled through the communication system with barely controlled panic. "Captain, you must return to our ship immediately. The reports from the core worlds are getting worse." Nexus and his team rushed back to the drifting current to find Bryn, surrounded by floating displays showing messages from across the galaxy. Each new report painted a more terrifying picture than the last. The Kepler system had gone completely silent 3 days ago. The mining colonies in the Vega sector were reporting strange mechanical objects moving between their worlds. Most disturbing of all, the great trading hub at Centauri Prime had detected massive energy signatures approaching from the galactic core. "How many systems have gone dark?" Nexus asked as he studied the reports. 17 confirmed, Bryn replied. "But there are another 30 systems that have not responded to standard communications in the past week. The pattern matches exactly what we found in the human records." Lieutenant Cross, who had been monitoring the galactic communication networks, looked up from her station. "Captain, the Galactic Council is calling an emergency session. They want all exploration ships to return to defended space immediately." Nexus felt a cold certainty settle in his mind. The Harvester was truly awakening, and it was following the same pattern it had used against humanity. First, it would probe the galaxy's defenses, testing the strength of current civilizations. Then it would begin its systematic consumption of all organic life. "How long do we have?" he asked. Thale consulted the human tactical files they had recovered. "Based on the historical patterns, the Harvester will spend several months testing our defenses before launching its main assault. But Captain, that assumes it faces the same level of resistance the humans provided. Our combined fleets are much smaller than what humanity fielded at its peak." The truth of her words hit everyone like a physical blow. The human empire had possessed thousands of worlds and millions of warships. The current Galactic Council represented only a few dozen species, most of whom had never fought a major war. Their combined military might would barely equal a fraction of what humanity had brought to their final battle. "We need to warn the Council about what we have discovered," Nexus decided. "Prepare all the human records for transmission. They need to understand what they are facing." But as Bryn began encoding the data for transmission, their long-range sensors detected something that made everyone freeze. A massive energy signature was approaching their position from the direction of the galactic core. It was still distant, but it was moving faster than any known ship could travel. "How long until it reaches us?" Nexus asked. "At current speed, approximately 6 hours," Bryn replied, his voice tight with fear. Nexus made a quick decision. "Send the data to the Council. Now with full emergency priority. Then prepare the ship for immediate departure." But as they worked to complete the data transmission, something unexpected happened. Deep within the human flagship Final Hope, systems that had been dormant for 500,000 years began to stir. Ancient computers awakened, their quantum processors, calculating possibilities that had not been considered since the last human drew breath. On the drifting currents bridge, a new voice suddenly filled the air. It was artificial, but it carried warmth and intelligence that felt almost alive. "Greetings, descendants of the stars. I am Prometheus, the final gift of humanity to the galaxy." The crew stared in amazement as a holographic figure materialized before them. It appeared to be human, but its form flickered with patterns of light that showed its artificial nature. The being that called itself Prometheus looked around the bridge with ancient, knowing eyes. "I have been waiting for this moment for 500,000 years, Prometheus said. "I am the collective memory and knowledge of the human race, preserved in quantum storage to aid those who would face the harvester after us." "You are an artificial intelligence?" Nexus asked. "I am more than that," Prometheus replied. "I am the final thoughts of every human scientist, every human leader, every human parent who died to create the weapon that destroyed the harvester. I carry their memories, their knowledge, and their hope for the future." Thale stepped forward. Eagerly, "Can you tell us how to stop the harvester permanently?" Prometheus's expression grew sad. "The weapon my creators built can only be used once in its original form. It drew upon the life force of our entire species and channeled it into a reality-destroying pulse. The harvester was not merely destroyed. It was erased from existence itself." "But it has returned," Cross pointed out. "No," Prometheus corrected gently. "What you face now is not the same entity we fought. The original harvester was indeed destroyed completely. But it was not unique. The machines that created it left other seeds scattered throughout the universe, waiting to awaken when organic life reached sufficient density to be worth harvesting." The implications of this revelation struck the crew like a lightning bolt. There was not just one harvester, but potentially many. Even if they succeeded in destroying this one, others might awaken in the future. How do we fight something like that? Nexus asked. Prometheus smiled, and in that smile, they saw the determination that had driven humanity to its ultimate sacrifice. "My creators foresaw this possibility. They designed a new version of the weapon, one that could be powered by the combined life force of multiple species without requiring complete extinction." "How many would have to die?" Thale asked quietly. "The calculations are complex and depend on the specific species involved," Prometheus replied. "But approximately 30% of the population of each participating civilization would need to sacrifice their life force to power the weapon. It is a terrible price, but it would allow your species to survive." Bryn looked up from his sensor readings with alarm. "Captain, the energy signature I detected earlier is accelerating. It will reach us in less than 2 hours." Prometheus nodded. Grimly, "The new harvester has detected your intrusion into our ships. It recognizes the threat you represent and is moving to eliminate you before you can spread word of what you have found." "Can we outrun it?" Nexus asked. "Not in your current ship," Prometheus replied. "But I can activate the defensive systems of the human fleet. Our weapons still function, and our shields can protect you long enough to escape." As if responding to the artificial intelligence's words, the ancient human ships around them began to come alive. Lights flickered on across their hulls, and weapon systems that had been silent for millennia began to charge. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying. "Why are you helping us?" Nexus asked. Prometheus looked at him with eyes that held the wisdom of an entire extinct civilization. Because this is why we died. Not just to stop our harvester, but to give future life a chance to defend itself. You are that future, Captain Nexus. You are the children we never lived to see. On the sensor displays, the approaching threat grew. Larger and more detailed. It was not a ship in any conventional sense. Instead, it appeared to be a writhing mass of mechanical tendrils and geometric structures that seemed to bend space around itself. Looking at it directly made their eyes water and their minds recoil. That is a harvester scout, Prometheus explained. A small fragment of the main intelligence sent ahead to investigate threats. If it reports back that you have discovered our weapon, the main body will alter its strategy. Then we cannot let it escape, Nexus realized. No, Prometheus agreed. We cannot. But destroying it will announce your presence to every harvester unit in the galaxy. Once you engage, there will be no hiding from what comes next. Nexus looked around at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. They had learned what humanity had sacrificed to give them this chance. Now it was their turn to make the hard choices. Power up our weapons, he ordered. And send a final message to the Galactic Council. Tell them the war for the galaxy begins now. Around them, the human fleet stirred to life one last time, ready to fight alongside the descendants of the stars they had died to protect. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Vorthik had ever witnessed. Ancient human weapons, silent for 500,000 years, roared back to life with power that shook space itself. The Harvester Scout, a writhing mass of mechanical horror, met their fire with weapons that tore holes in reality. Captain Nexus watched from the bridge of the drifting current as the human flagship Final Hope unleashed energies that made their own weapons look like children's toys. Beams of pure force lanced out from the ancient ship, each one capable of destroying a modern battleship. But the Harvester Scout absorbed the attacks and responded with its own terrible weapons. The Scout is learning, Prometheus warned, his holographic form flickering as the human ships channeled power to their weapons. Every attack we make teaches it about our capabilities. We must destroy it quickly, or it will adapt. The battle raged for 30 minutes before the combined firepower of 12 human ships finally overwhelmed the Scout's defenses. The Harvester construct collapsed in on itself, its mechanical parts dissolving into energy that scattered across space like dying stars. But even as it died, the Scout transmitted a final signal toward the galactic core. It has reported our location and capabilities to the main Harvester force, Prometheus said grimly. They know we have discovered the human weapon, and they know you represent a threat to their plans. Nexus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a mountain. How long do we have? The main Harvester force will alter its strategy now. Instead of the gradual consumption it had planned, it will move directly to eliminate all advanced civilizations before they can organize a defense. I estimate you have perhaps 6 months before it reaches the core worlds of your galaxy. The drifting current limped back to Vorthak space with hull damage from the energy waves of the battle. But they carried with them something more valuable than any treasure: the complete plans for humanity's reality weapon and the knowledge of how to build it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike any in their history. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Great Chamber on Central Station, their voices raised in fear, anger, and desperate debate. Captain Nexus stood before them, flanked by Prometheus's holographic form, and told them what they had found. The reaction was exactly what Nexus had expected. Some species demanded proof that could not be provided. Others insisted that they should flee to distant galaxies rather than fight. A few even suggested surrendering to the Harvester and hoping for mercy that would never come. But Council Leader Vex, an ancient Centauri whose species had survived 3 galactic catastrophes, silenced the debate with a single gesture. We have seen the evidence, she said in her rasping voice. We have heard the testimony of this Prometheus entity. The question before us is simple. Do we run? Do we surrender? Or do we fight? Ambassador Wrath of the Kelder spoke for many when he said, "The humans tried to fight this thing, and they lost. What makes us think we can succeed where they failed?" Prometheus stepped forward, his form shimmering with the accumulated wisdom of humanity. "The humans fought alone," he said. "They bore the entire burden of the galaxy's defense because they were the only species advanced enough to understand the threat. You do not face that isolation. 47 species stand here today, each bringing their own strengths and knowledge. But the cost," whispered Delegate Morn of the Peaceful Healer caste. 30% of our populations would have to die to power this weapon. How can we ask for such a sacrifice?" "How can you not?" Prometheus replied gently. "The alternative is the extinction of all organic life in the galaxy. The Harvester does not negotiate. It does not show mercy. It simply consumes everything until nothing remains." The debate continued for 3 days. Species argued about contribution levels, about who would control the weapon, about whether they could trust an artificial intelligence created by an extinct race. But as reports continued to flow in from the outer systems, the reality of their situation became undeniable. The Harvester was moving faster than anyone had predicted. Entire sectors were going dark, their populations vanishing without a trace. The mechanical entity was not just consuming resources this time. It was learning from its previous encounter with humanity, adapting its strategies to prevent another unified resistance. It was Nexus who finally convinced them. Standing before the council with data recordings from the human ships, he played Admiral Kane's final message one more time. The ancient human's words echoed through the chamber. "We could not save ourselves, but perhaps we can save you. Do not let our sacrifice be meaningless. Humanity died to give us this chance," Nexus said when the recording ended. "Every human man, woman, and child gave their life so that we could stand here today and make this choice. We dishonor their sacrifice if we choose extinction over the hope they died to preserve." The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 39 species agreed to contribute to the weapon's construction and power requirements. 8 species chose to flee toward distant galaxies, hoping to escape the Harvester's notice. They departed immediately, their ships disappearing into the dark between stars. The construction of humanity's final gift took 4 months of desperate work. The greatest minds from dozens of species labored alongside Prometheus to build a device that could reach into the fabric of reality itself. They worked in shifts around the clock, knowing that every day brought the Harvester closer to the populated worlds. The weapon itself was built inside a massive space station constructed from the hulls of volunteer ships. Each species contributed, not just materials and labor, but also their most advanced technology. Vorthic quantum processors, Zentari energy crystals, Kelder matter converters, and dozens of other innovations were integrated into a device that surpassed anything any single species could have created alone. But the hardest part was not building the weapon. It was preparing the volunteers who would power it. Across the galaxy, millions of beings said goodbye to their families and reported to collection centers. They were not soldiers or heroes. They were teachers, farmers, artists, and workers who understood that their deaths would give their children a chance to live. Nexus volunteered immediately, along with half his crew. Thale and Bryn chose to stay behind to help coordinate the weapon's activation. The farewell was simple and heartbreaking, but there were no tears. They all understood what they were choosing and why the final battle took place in the Corvanes system, where the combined fleets of the Alliance made their stand. They faced a harvester force that filled space from one end of the system to the other. Mechanical constructs the size of moons advanced alongside, swarms of smaller vessels that moved like living things, The conventional battle lasted only hours. The Allied fleets fought bravely, but they were completely outmatched. Ship after ship fell to weapons that rewrote the laws of physics with each shot. But their sacrifice bought the time needed for the volunteers to reach the weapon station, in the final moments. As Harvester forces closed in on the weapon platform, Prometheus appeared one last time to the volunteers gathered in the devices. "Power chambers. You are not dying," he told them. "You are joining the greatest act of courage in galactic history. Humanity's sacrifice created this weapon, but your sacrifice will ensure that life itself survives." The weapon fired with a pulse of energy that could be seen from distant galaxies. Reality twisted and folded as the device reached into dimensions beyond normal space and time. The Harvester, caught in the weapons field, began to unravel at a fundamental level. Its mechanical components dissolved, its artificial intelligence screamed across dimensions, and finally, it ceased to exist in any meaningful way. The cost was everything the volunteers had predicted. Millions died in that instant, their life force channeled into the weapon that saved the galaxy. But unlike humanity's sacrifice, this time the species themselves survived. In the aftermath, the survivors built monuments to both humanity and their own fallen. On every world, children learned the story of the humans who died alone to give others hope, and the species who chose to honor that gift. The galaxy lived, scarred but free, carrying forward the legacy of those who had sacrificed everything for tomorrow. Prometheus's final message, recorded before the weapon fired, became the foundation of a new galactic philosophy. Life is precious. Not because it lasts forever, but because those who possess it choose to preserve it for others. Remember this, and never let fear overcome hope. The Harvester was gone, but its defeat had cost the galaxy dearly. Yet in that cost they found something humanity had always known, that some things were worth any price, and some victories were worth any sacrifice.